Hello, this is Ben TV News Roundup, a compilation of major stories in the weekend, and I'm Tunde Alabi. Thank you for being part of the program today. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has criticized the government over the ongoing crisis in the NHS, leading to 30,000 patients left in the back of ambulance for more than half an hour, 50,000 left waiting on trolleys in corridors in November, and less than half of the funding required by the NHS released by the government. Speaking at the Prime Minister's Question Time, Prime Minister Mrs May said £6.3 billion in extra funding will be given to the NHS over the coming years to deal with any crisis.
Is the Prime Minister satisfied that the National Health Service has the resources it needs this winter?
Prime Minister.
First of all, can I join the Right Honourable Gentleman? He refers to those NHS staff who will be working very hard this Christmas and who won't get a break at Christmas. Of course, it's not only our NHS staff who will be working hard this Christmas, it's also our emergency services and many others who go to work on Christmas Day so others can enjoy their Christmas Day, and we thank all of them. He asks about preparations for winter. I can say to him, the Health Service has prepared more extensively for this winter than ever before. These plans are helping to ensure safe, timely care for patients. As it happens, those aren't my words, they're the words of the Chief Executive of NHS providers.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, Mr Speaker, Sir Simon Stevens did say the NHS needs £4 billion next year just to stand still, and the reality is the government has given the NHS less than half of what he asked for. Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister talks about the money the NHS needs, but in the 50,000 people were left waiting on trolleys in hospital corridors last month. Last week, more ambulances were diverted to other hospitals because of A&E pressures. 12,000 patients were kept waiting in the back of an ambulance because there was no room at the A&E. So ask the Prime Minister again, has the NHS got the resources it needs this winter to deal with this crisis?
Prime Minister.
To the Right Honourable Gentleman, he knows full well that NHS funding is at record levels. And in the autumn budget, we put some extra funding in to the NHS this winter, in addition to the £6.3 billion extra that is going in to the NHS over the coming years. But let me time after time again, the Right Honourable Gentleman will come to this House and complain about what is happening in the Health Service. Can I just say to him, can I just tell the House what is happening in the Health Service? We see now 7 million more diagnostic tests than 7 years ago. 2.2 million more people getting operations. And survival rates for cancer at their highest ever level. Now, those are figures, but what does it mean? What it means is more people getting the treatment they need. It means more elderly people getting their hip operations. And it means that today, there are nearly 6,500 people alive who wouldn't have been if we hadn't improved our cancer care.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr Speaker, in the first 3 weeks of this winter, 30,000 patients were left waiting in the back of an ambulance for more than half an hour. These delays risk lives. If the NHS had the resources it needs, you would expect it to be meeting its key treatment and waiting time targets. So can the Prime Minister give us a cast-iron pledge that all of those targets will be met in 2018?
Prime Minister.
What we are looking to do in 2018 is, yes, improve the standard of care that we provide in our health service and ensure that we can improve on those figures that I have just given him, that we do see more people being treated in our health service, that we do see better survival rates for our cancer. That's why we have been putting the extra money into the National Health Service. But it's not just about putting extra money into the National Health Service. It is about ensuring that we see the proper integration provision of health and social care at grassroots level. That's what the STPs are about in many areas, opposed by the Labour Party. It is why we've lifted the cap so we see more nurse training places, opposed by the Labour Party. This is about ensuring that we have the staff and the capability in our NHS to deliver the first-class, world-class service that our NHS is. We should be proud of our NHS. We are, and we're going to make it even better.
Jeremy Corbyn!
A&E waiting time targets haven't been met for 2.5 years. Cancer treatment targets haven't been met for 2 years. Our A&E departments are bursting at the seams because the government has failed to ensure that people can get a GP appointment when they need one. The government promised to recruit an extra 5,000 GPs by 2020. Where are they?
Prime Minister!
We are seeing more GPs. We are seeing more training places for our GPs. But if he wants to talk about targets, if he wants to talk about what we see on targets, he talks about A&E. Well, let's look at what has happened in Wales on accident and emergency. The standard on A&E in Wales was last met in 2008. Now, let me just think. Which party's in government in Wales? Is it the Conservatives? No, it's the Labour Party in government in Wales. On cancer care, the standard was last met in June 2008 in Wales. He should look at what the Labour Party are actually delivering before he comes to this House and complains.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Speaker, the Welsh Government relies on a block grant from England which has been cut by 5% by 2020. Yet despite that, in Wales, 85.5% of cancer patients start their treatment within 62 days, higher than is achieved in England. Mr. Speaker, my question was about GPs. Perhaps the Prime Minister is not aware there are 1,000 less GPs than there were the day she became Prime Minister. It's not only the lack of GPs. Another issue, Mr. Speaker, that's driving people into A&Es are the £6 billion cuts made to social care budgets. 2.3 million older people have unmet care needs. Does the Prime Minister regret, and the Chancellor is sitting absolutely next to her, that he didn't put 1 penny in his budget for social care?
Prime Minister!
We have put £2 billion extra money into social care. We did that in the spring budget. But he started his question by referencing the record of the last Labour government on health. Well, you know, the last Labour government's record on health, their NHS legacy was described as a mess. We're clearing that up. We're putting more money into the NHS. But who was it who described Labour's NHS legacy as a mess? It was the right honourable gentleman. When he's running for leader, he denounces the Labour Party. Now he's leader of the Labour Party, he's trying to praise it.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Speaker, can I give some... Mr. Speaker, if I could quote the Prime Minister something she might be familiar with. If the government wants to reduce the pressures on the health service and keep people out of hospital in the first place, then it needs to tackle the chronic underfunding of care and support services in the community, which are at a tipping point. Who said that? Izzy Seacombe, Conservative leader of Warwickshire County Council. Mr. Speaker, the question was on social care, but the issue is about the NHS as a whole. It's there, Mr. Speaker, to provide care and dignity for all if they fall ill. But our NHS goes into this winter in crisis. Nurses and other workers, no pay rise for years. NHS targets not met for years. staff shortages, GP numbers falling. The reality is mental health budgets have been cut, social care budgets been cut, public health budgets cut. The Prime Minister today has shown just how out of touch he is. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, our NHS is being recklessly put at risk by her government. That is the truth, Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister has also been informed that government austerity agenda has caused alarming increase in homelessness in Britain. The Member of Parliament for Tooting, Dr. Rosina Harley-Khan, disclosed this during the Prime Minister's question time.
In 2009, the Prime Minister said it was a tragedy that the number of children falling into the poverty cycle was continuing to rise. Every child deserves to have a roof over their head and food on the table. Yet on her watch, in Wandsworth alone, the number of families forced to survive on food banks is continuing to rise, and 2,500 children, yes, children, will wake up homeless on Christmas Day. So my question is simple. When will this austerity-driven government say enough is enough and put an end to this tragedy?
Prime Minister!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Honourable Lady should note that, in fact, this government has lifted hundreds of thousands of children out of absolute poverty. But I think it's important. It's important for all those who have heard her question to be aware of this. She talks of 2,500 children in Wandsworth waking up homeless on Christmas Day. Anybody hearing that will assume that what that means is that 2,500 children will be sleeping on our streets. It does not. It does not mean that. It's important that we are clear about this for all those who hear those questions, because as we all know, families with children who are accepted as homeless will be provided with accommodation. And I would also point out to honourable members opposite that statutory homelessness is lower now than it was for most of the period of the last Labour government.
Also speaking earlier on with me on BNTV Dialogue in Diaspora, property consultant Ugo Arinze and Awolosewa expressed concerns at the rising level of homelessness across Britain.
You know, statistics, can go for either side. So I think that the reality is, particularly in London, there is a housing shortage that people obviously is fair to criticize on. So the question is, what are the policies and what is the way forward? I think at the one extreme, it is not about vilifying foreign buyers, because somebody buying a £20 million property is not helping the housing solution for somebody on benefits. The question is, and then on the social housing side of things, when we look at a Grenfell Towers, when we have these homes, are they fit for human habitation? And who is responsible for looking after them? So there's a host of issues here along the housing spectrum. So A, there's a need to build more housing, which I've touched upon in terms
Government said it's building more houses.
It's not building
more
enough.
Affordable.
It's not building enough, and
So
that's just the
who
reality.
do we take, the government or the people in the sector?
Sorry? Well, I think
We go for people in the sector.
Well, the government has
People
set
like
these
you?
targets. The government has set targets. And the question is, if you set targets, that means that they should be achievable. Now, the question is, who do you put responsibility to? I don't think it's strictly on the side of developers, because developers will argue the cost of accessing land and the process for regulation makes it so onerous that they can't deliver enough housing. On the other, so I think that there is something that the government can do as well. But I also think that most places, when you find really true revolution, it's in partnerships. It's people working together. It's people in the communities also getting involved to say, what is it that they need? And it's when you talk about the quality of housing here, and the private rental sector is one that I feel very sensitive about, because I own property, whether it's here or in America, and I think I'm a good, decent landlord. Yet I feel like, on the one hand, the government has penalized private landlords because they're trying to fix the housing problem, but they're going about it the wrong way. Not to say that there shouldn't be regulation on the fitness of a unit that's delivered to the market, whether that's inspections, whether that's verification, and there's a process for tenants to complain. Then the government has to step involved, because when Jeremy Corbyn's talking about people living in conditions of damp, if that is reported, what is the recourse? When does the council step in? What is their mechanisms to force that landlord to make the right repairs? Is it collecting the rent on behalf of the landlord until those things get fixed? I mean, there are things you can do to force landlords to deliver good quality properties. That's number one. But on the other hand, then recognize that the private sector has actually filled in a space where the government hasn't, right? So if social housing is no longer becoming as available, someone who, might be working full-time, saves a bit, gets a second property as a landlord, shouldn't be penalized with an additional 3% stamp duty because it's seen as a bad thing. Perhaps they're delivering rental housing in a market where, again, most people cannot afford buying into their first home. So nothing I say is in the extreme and meaning all or one, but it's saying that there are solutions along the spectrum that I think could help. And it's also, again, people paying their fair share of taxes, but then showing where do those taxes go? Does it go back into a pool that benefits social housing? Are we creating enough density? Are we creating mixed-use spaces where high-income units can also coexist with low-income units? And that's a part of
the mechanisms for building houses for people is not there. Then it will mean that, in a sense, you're going to lower your standards, because what's the choice? Leaving the person in families in bed and breakfast, leaving people on the street, or putting them in substandard housing, which should not be the case. We are both agreeing on that. But we're talking about the situation. And that's where we come back to the fact that as more and more people are coming in, if you have a housing shortage and there are not lots of people coming in, you don't notice it so much. But as you have more and more people coming, there is a problem. Even the housing that's there, some people working can't afford it. And those that the council is responsible for, therefore the council needs to provide housing for them.
I'm sure you're as shocked as I am that there are so many people living on the streets, beds made of cardboard, huddled in shop fronts, trying to keep warm and trying to keep safe. Many people, including a large number of young and vulnerable adults in every part of the country, now face nights without safe and secure accommodation. Perhaps one of the saddest things is to see former members of the armed services who fought and sacrificed so much, but they were now down on their luck and they're out on the streets. And our country actually has a duty to do more to support them. Last week I went to the Connection at St Martin's in the Field Church in central London. The brilliant staff and volunteers are an example to all of us. They provide much needed shelter and laundry services and hot food day in and day out.
And what we do is identify those people who are on the streets and try to work with them towards getting them in somewhere, into some accommodation, and look at long-term plans for them as to how we get them out of homelessness and into some normal living again. We'll go around some of the areas that we know people are sleeping rough in and see if we can engage with them.
Well, thank you very much.
Obviously this time of year it's very, very busy. It's kind of the run up to Christmas and people out shopping and in the bars and the restaurants, and we do find that we have a lot of our clients who will be out at this time, so we're going to have a look around here and see if we can find any of our people that need any support this evening.
The street sleepers are just the tip of the iceberg of homelessness. There are thousands more sofa hopping. There are 80,000 families in temporary accommodation without secure homes.
Sometimes even with the best of efforts, people find that the system is not helping them. So it's trying to find ways to get people back into employment, into housing, and build people's self-esteem back. It's a hell of a knock to be rough sleeping, and you need all the help.
So it isn't just about bricks and mortar, it's about these human stories beneath it. Community has always been at the heart of liberalism, and this is a time of year to make that commitment real. That's why I'm asking you to take out some time this Christmas and help with a local charity near you. As Liberal Democrats, we want to see a society where everybody has access to shelter, and that's why in the new year I'm launching a campaign focusing very specifically on the problem of homelessness. And of course this is partly about affordable housing, but it isn't just that, it also takes us into issue about mental health. And it isn't just an issue for Christmas, it's all around the year.
U.S. President Donald Trump has said the new tax law is a major overhaul of America's tax law. President Trump has promised to overhaul U.S. tax system in a way that it will see a massive cut to businesses and Americans during his election campaign.
A jubilant Trump addressed an audience outside the White House Wednesday against the backdrop of applauding Republicans.
It's the largest, I always say the most massive, but it's the largest tax cut in the history of our country, and reform, but tax cut. Really something special.
Trump said the tax reform will give relief to middle-class Americans and will help struggling farmers keep their farms. He also said the tax reform will encourage companies to invest in the United States.
This is going to mean companies are going to be coming back. You know, I campaigned on the fact that we're not going to lose our companies anymore. They're going to stay in our country. And they're going to stay in our country. And you've been seeing what's been happening even at this prospect.
But Democrats object to how the bill was rushed through the Congress without public hearing and the addition of last-minute amendments. They say the bill contains loopholes that companies will use to avoid paying taxes.
Corporations are flush with cash right now. The stock market's booming. Job creation isn't. Look at all the companies that have already said they're going to use their tax break for stock buybacks, for dividends that don't affect average Americans.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said the tax breaks given to ordinary Americans will be lost to the increased price of health insurance they will have to pay. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi said the bill gives the top 1% of the richest Americans more than 80% of the benefits, while 86 million working families will see a tax increase.
And salting crumbs they give working families are meager and temporary. The tax breaks for corporate America are vast and permanent.
In the immediate future, the plan will see the majority of taxpayers getting lower tax bills, but those cuts expire in 2025. The tax reform bill is projected to add more than $1 trillion over the next decade to the current U.S. debt of close to $20 trillion.
Meanwhile, President Trump's tax bill victory may have brought his volatile year as president to a happy ending. The new tax law is a massive sweeping change to U.S. tax reform.
From his first moments in office, Donald Trump vowed to deliver on his campaign promises.
From this day forward, a new vision will govern our land. From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first.
But 2017 was a year full of presidential distractions, from Twitter feuds with critics to a failure on health care, and an ongoing Russia probe with no end in sight.
They're spending millions and millions of dollars. There is absolutely no collusion. I didn't make a phone call to Russia. I have nothing to do with Russia.
Trump's first-year struggles are reflected in dismal public opinion polls, says Larry Sabato.
It's not just that about 60% of Americans do not approve of his job performance. What's really significant is that twice as many Americans strongly disapprove of his job performance as Americans who strongly approve of his job performance.
The yeas are 227 and the nays are 203. The conference report is adopted without objection. The motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
Trump is expecting a boost from his victory on tax cuts, helping to ensure that his core supporters hang with him, says analyst Robert Jones.
I think people are pretty dug in. So we're seeing, among Trump supporters, he does have this base that's not really going to move. White evangelicals, for example, more than 7 in 10 support him.
Democrats lost on the tax bill, but have had success in recent elections by making Trump the central issue, setting the stage for possible gains in midterm congressional elections in 2018. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer.
This tax bill will be an anchor around the ankles of every Republican. If they haven't learned it yet, they're going to learn it next November.
Historically, midterm elections have not been kind to first-term presidents, says Molly Reynolds.
One thing that we know is that the president's party usually loses seats in the first midterm of a presidential administration anyway, and that is exacerbated when the president is unpopular. And so I think that given where he is politically, that could have effects for the Republicans in 2018.
Trump's major challenge for the new year is broadening his base of support, according to pollster Frank Newport.
For him to get a higher approval rating, he's got to somehow move those Democrats and some independents, where he's getting about a 30% approval now, and that's very hard.
Unless there is a turnaround, Trump may be destined to follow in the footsteps of predecessors Barack Obama and George W. Bush, both of whom suffered midterm election defeats.
Conclude the news roundup for this week. Thank you for being part of the program. I'm Tunde Alabi. Enjoy the rest of your week. Bye.
Continued efforts to reach the African and other ethnic communities in the United Kingdom with greater impacts and create the platform to hear your silent and unheard views in this hugely growing community in the United Kingdom. Our channel, Ben TV, presents to you another live current affairs television program. Our focus on the program is to review and discuss issues around the diaspora community in the UK. The program offers you that unrestricted voice on issues affecting you in the UK. Join us live every Monday at 10 a.m. to 12 noon. Another business segment of Dialogue in Diaspora, 2 to 3 p.m. every Monday. But guess what? You can be part of the program. Just send us an email at bentelevisionuk@gmail.com. Dialogue in Diaspora, the voice, your opinion on our TV.